Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Politics. As we said in the beginning, there's two stories I want to take a look at this week. George H.W. Bush died last Saturday, and this week has been all about him. And also, I want to take a look at some thoughts on China. And we're going to take a look not just on the trade, but on the country itself, the politics, the military, just on China in general. But before we get started any of that, what I'd like to do is to tell you that this program and all the other programs we do are sponsored by the Prayer Box Ministry, as you can see over my shoulder. You can go there, prayerboxministry.org, that's O-R-G. If you'd like to know a little bit more about who we are and what we do, you can go over there and check us out. We like to say you could go there and you can do one thing every day, 7 days a week, and never repeat for 7 years. And every week we add more content, usually 5 different things we add a week. So there's a lot over there to do. Go over there and check us out, prayerboxministry.org. Okay, the two stories I want to talk about. The first one is George H.W. Bush dies. He died last Saturday. It's my understanding he died from old age. He was 94 years old. Um, One of the interesting things just a little sidebar that I found out is he parachuted. Now, if you know anything about Bush, he was in a wheelchair for a lot of years, uh, simply because he was feeble. But he worked it out to where he was attached to another parachutist, and he jumped out of the plane at 70 years old, 80 years old, and 85 years old. I don't think he did it at 90. He died at 94 years old. He led a full life, a tremendous hero. The last president we've had that actually fought in World War II, he was a uh, airplane pilot for the military. He was the head of the CIA. He was the vice president for 8 years under Reagan. He was president for 4 years. His whole life was dedicated to the U.S. government. He lied in state for 2 days in the Capitol. They kept it open overnight. He had thousands of people streaming by. Um, they had a public ceremony at a church in Washington D.C., which was radio anyway. It was covered by radio live, which was a 2 or 3 hour ordeal. Then he was flown back to, I believe it was Austin, Texas, where they had a private ceremony um, in Texas. Then they did a train ride back to the University of Texas, I do believe, which is where his library is at. And he'll be buried next to his wife, Barbara. Um, and as much acrimony as there was between the Bush and the Trumps, I thought Bush or Trump rose to the occasion. Air Force One is actually two 747 planes. I did not know that. I thought there was only one, but there's two. And Trump let one of them be used to transport the body back and forth. And he called it because it's only really technically Air Force One when the president is aboard. And when Bush was on it, they gave it another name and then a dash 41 because he was the 41st president. I thought it was very gracious, very kind. Bush did insist that he come to the funeral, but he did not get an opportunity to speak. He did go. I thought he was very gracious. Um, and I was very proud that Trump was president. Um, So he was, let's see, I believe Friday of this week was the day when the train ride went to um, University of Texas, and I believe he was buried Saturday. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And as we record this, we record this on Sunday. But our 41st president. Now, I have to say, as a right winger, it's never a good opportunity to badmouth anyone, and I would never badmouth somebody on this time. But Bush was a one-term president, and there was a reason for that. He lied to the American people, and we all knew it. His famous saying is, "Read my lips. No new taxes." Guess what? He raised taxes, so he didn't get a second. And most of his policies were liberal, just like his son, and I didn't care for that. Um, Especially his son. Well, both of them actually got elected pretending to be conservatives. I mean, Bush HW ran on the fact that he was a vice president to a very popular conservative president, Ronald Reagan. Then when he got in there, he turned liberal on everything. Now, the only good thing he did, and even then he didn't go all the way, was the first Gulf War. We won, and we won handily. It wasn't even close. But he didn't go in and get Saddam Hussein, and he should have, because his son had to go back in and get him. Uh, and that contributed to the reason he didn't win the second 4 years. But the main reason was he lied, and the reason he lied actually was he was trying to appease the left and the liberals and the media because they said we need a tax increase to help with the deficit. That wasn't true at all. By the time um, Reagan was out of office, we were going gangbusters. The 80s were called the go-go 80s. Our economy was doing great. Bush didn't have to do anything but sit in his chair and keep his mouth shut, and the economy would have gone great. They started fooling with it, and Congress started raising spending, and he started raising taxes, and we still did good. But because of that, Bill Clinton now gets to step in 4 years and claim a balanced budget because Newt Gingrich cut spending from the Congress. So anyway, I don't mean to rehash history, but that's why he was a one-term president. Um, Another thing about Bush is he's the first one that introduced the term New World Order. Nobody really knew what it was back then, but now we know. And wow. Um, and we now know that every president up until Trump has been pushing us towards this New World Order. And what that really means is ceding power from the United States to the United Nations. That's the New World Order. And Barack insane Obama did the most damage, but Bush, H.W. Bush, definitely was the one that got that ball rolling. So, as a person, I thought he was probably a very good person. Uh, on the outside, I know nothing about his personal life, but as an individual on the outside, he was a good person. He dedicated his life to governing and giving. He was head of the CIA. Um, he did a lot of good things for this country, as far as I know. One of the things that are against him that nobody's talked about is I believe after Kennedy died, there was something called I'm pretty sure it was called the Warren Commission, where they looked into it, and Bush was on that committee, and the main report was hidden. It was supposed to be made public after 50 years. The 50 years was up right after Trump took office, and Trump kept it wrapped up. So I'm pretty sure there's a lot of bad stuff in there, and he was involved in that. So, you know, who knows? Who knows? All I know is that H.W. Bush is dead at 94 years old, and he is now, a week later, he's now buried and in the ground, and now we move on. So, when I was trying to decide the major story I wanted to talk about this week, it occurred to me that China has been a big deal, and the stock market has gone crazy this week. I mean, we lost like I don't know the number, but we lost a lot. Like I think it was 4% of value of the stock market in 1 week. And the reason is, and it's odd because Trump Trump and Xi came to an agreement that they would not do anything for the next 90 days. That should have calmed the markets down. It did not. They went crazy. So I started thinking about it. I thought, well, part of the problem is that the China issue is a lot more complicated and a bigger issue than the stock market is taking advantage of or paying attention to. And the American people aren't being told this by the press. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, China and the United States come at any issue from two different backgrounds. Now, especially for millennials that don't know, I want to paint you a picture of a billion people, a billion, okay, living in a geographical area where 99% of them are poor as dirt. They are subsistence farmers. There's no business. Everything that is done by the government. All of your food you are supposed to grow, and there's not enough room to grow enough to make any money to sell. Everybody has their own little patch of land. And as the people multiply, the land doesn't multiply. So China put on a birth limit to one child. So guess what happens? They kill a lot of the females when they're born because they can't help on the farm, but the men can. So now they have a whole lot of boys and no girls. But they have a strictly agrarian, and it's all by hand. I know this because I lived in Taiwan and they took these values to Taiwan. It's done by hand. They don't have Caterpillar tractors. They don't have equipment. You know, the most equipment they had at that time was 2 oxen and one plow. I mean, one blade of a plow that the guy walked behind these 2 oxen and guided this plow through the dirt. I mean, that's the entirety of their equipment. They planted their crops by hand, they harvested by hand, they weeded by hand, they did everything by hand. So at some point now, another major time would be Tiananmen Square, and that was back in the 70s, I believe, where the people were uprising. The population was growing. The Chinese had a thirst for everything Western, and everything was staying agrarian. The young people wanted change, so they went to protest, and the government went in to squelch them. And the famous video from that time was a young man standing in front of a tank that was coming in to clear out the crowds in Tiananmen Square, and the tank kept coming at him, and he stood right there with his hands behind his back, ready to die. And the tank stopped. At that point, the leaders in China knew that things had to change. So they slowly but surely took on a quasi-capitalist society, which meant they would allow people to start businesses, and they went slowly, very slowly at the beginning, because they had to figure out how would this work? How could the Chinese government allow that to happen and still keep track of it? What they came up with is they would make the rules, they would check, they would have final say, but the Chinese could run their own business and keep their own money and spend it the way they wanted. Well, it proved to be a great system for them. I mean, at least now they had an opportunity to get off the farm. So what happened is all of these farmers came off of the farm and went to the city, which is what we did back in our early beginning, but they were highly regulated. And the government was in charge of could they buy, how much could they buy, how much could they spend, how much could they invest. So it was communism with incentive to provide goods for the people because the government obviously couldn't do it anymore. And that's one of the lessons that we should take from this. Socialism or communism doesn't matter. At some point, you run out of everybody's money. I mean, think about that. With the platform here, and I'm going to go down a rabbit trail, that Bernie Sanders and Cortez are pushing right now. If we took every dollar that every American or every person in America, North America, made and gave it to the U.S. government, we could not do what they want to do. Medicare for all, forgiveness of student debt, college free for all, uh, get rid of coal and oil and go totally green, update every house and business with totally green technology. There's no way we could afford all of that with 100% of taxes. No way. There's no way that could happen. That's where the communists were. So they decided they needed to change. So they kept communism in with the strict control, but allow people to have some semblance of capitalism. Now, with that backdrop, here is some more. They have one leader, Xi Zheng. I don't know. Xi is his first name. Was recently voted president for life in China, and he looks to be in his 50s. So he's going to be around a while. And so, leader for life. They have one leader. Whatever he says goes. It would be kind of like having a king. Now, if you ask them, they will say, "Well, they have a Congress that he has to go to, and he has to report to." Yeah, that's just for show. Whatever the president wants, the president gets without question. They have one leader, and that leader now is for life, kind of like Mao Zedong. They recently passed or adopted, I guess I should say, a goal that by 2025, I believe, they want themselves to be the leader of the world, and not just the leader. They want to lead in, and they list out certain businesses in their plan. And of this is militarily, in steel, in natural resources, in manufacturing, and technology, among others. They want to be the leaders of the world in those fields, plus others, by 2025. That's 7 years. Okay? Now, we in the West play by a certain set of rules, unwritten, But still, we all play by the basic same set of rules. We like to play by the rules. We all want to play from a level playing field. And if you beat me, that means you're better at the game. If I beat you, that means I'm better at the game. But we all understand the rules. The Chinese do not play by those rules at all. Let me give you an example. The United States, the Western countries, and I'm going to include in that Japan and South Korea and Taiwan, all play by this set of rules. And one of those rules is they invest in research and development because out of R&D comes innovations, new medications, new technologies. Uh, Everything comes out of new technologies. China doesn't. They invest nothing in R&D. Okay, what they do is they steal from anybody they can steal from. If they can steal your natural resources, they steal it. Now, how do I know this to be a fact? I lived in Taiwan. When I lived in Taiwan, and they brought some of those same beliefs with them from the mainland. And I'm going to give you an example. I was young at the time. An album from any artist in the United States at that time would run from $5 to $10 an album. For those millennials who don't know what an album is, it's a round disc, it's black, it had, 10 to 15 songs on it. Anyway, and you play it on a record player. $5 to $10 an album. I could buy the same thing pirated overseas all day long for 25 cents. They had to pay no royalties. What they did is they went and bought one album for $5 to $10, made a copy, and then ran them off, mass produced them, and sold them for a quarter. And obviously they made money. So that's an example of them taking our intellectual and creative policy and stealing it and learning how to do it from stealing. Well, that's what the mainland China does. Another way they do it is the new businesses from the West that went into China. China said, yeah, you can come in and set up shop, but any technology you have to share with us. Otherwise, go away. We don't want you. The problem and the mistake the Western countries made was they said, okay, because they felt like the trade-off from giving up their technology versus a million people market was too good to pass up. Again, business is thinking short term, not long term. But anyway, that's the position, and that's how the Chinese operate. Trump comes in and says, okay, first off, you are selling us $350 billion worth of stuff in a year. You're only buying 100 or 200 billion from us. We have a trade deficit of $200 billion every year. And you're taking that 200 billion and you're building your country up at our expense. We're done with that. We're going to start putting tariffs on all of your stuff because what the Chinese are doing, let me just make this real simple. So let's say, and steel and aluminum is the main one. So let's say that to make a steel beam cost $5 to make. The Chinese government would give the business that was making the steel $3 per bar. So now it only costs them $2. So now they can afford to ship it to the United States, sell it in the United States for $5 a piece. The U.S. can't make one of those for $5. because we're not getting subsidized. It cost us $8 to $9. So China was using the government's money to dump their stuff on the U.S. that was of a lower quality, and yet it put the steel companies in the United States out of business because they were being subsidized. And the Chinese government could keep doing that because they were selling it at $5. So the company would get the $5, and then they would give the $3 back to the Chinese government, and they just kept going that way. What that did is that put the U.S. steel companies out of business. Trump came in and said, no, 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 no. We're going to tax that at 25%. So now it made the prices about the same. Well, of course, China got upset. But the U.S. steel industry went crazy. They started opening new plants and making steel, and now we're up and running. And China is upset about that. Usually I am anti-tariff, but I got to tell you, when the other side is cheating, you got to do what you got to do. And China was cheating. And it's not just the steel and aluminum where China is cheating. They are cheating all the way around the board. They are cheating on our technology. They are cheating with our intellectual properties. They are cheating with our creative and music policies and our literary. They are stealing everything they can 24/7 from us. We can't let that happen. They will be a dominant power in the world, and they will be number one if we don't stop them. And Trump is the only president so far that has had the gumption to go in there and stop them. The economists were saying it was a terrible thing. We're doing great. China is suffering. Their economy is stuttering and having problems. They are begging for us to make a deal with them, and China and Trump is saying, why would I do that? You have to do A, B, C, D, E, and F. And China said, we don't even want to do A. Well, I don't blame you. If I were sitting in G's shoes, I wouldn't want to do A, B, C, D, and E either. You've been stealing from me for 30 years, and now I'm calling you on it. Well, of course it's going to hurt. But that doesn't make it any less true. So Trump is right, because China does not play by the same set of rules that we in the West do. When I say the West, I don't mean just the United States. I mean all the Western countries, England, Australia, most of Europe, we all play by the same decent set of rules. The communist and socialist countries, they don't play by the same rules. And as much as I hate to say it, Russia plays by pretty much the same rules. At least they understand them and pretend to go by them for the most part. Now, there are times when they go off the reservations. They don't have the exact same as the West. But for the most part, but China, North Korea, Cuba, most of the South American countries, I mean, everyone, the socialists and communists, they don't play by the same set of rules. They don't see the world in the same way that the West does. I want you to remember something. Without President Trump, there is no question that China would have been the world's dominant leader by 2025. That would have happened without question. They were making $200 billion a year from us. With that $200 billion, in the last decade, they have been on a buying binge around the world. They have been buying up natural resources from around the world, gold, silver, and I can't remember the name of it, but there is a natural resource that goes into cell phones, and it's a very limited thing. But China has pretty much cornered the market in that, and now in order to build cell phones, we got to buy that from them. Think about that for a minute. But they have been and the reason they can go on that buying binge is because they're getting $200 billion extra from us a year until Trump came into office. Now all of a sudden their economy is going down. They were having 7% a year growth in China, and nobody could figure out why. Well, it's very simple. When you're making an extra $200 billion a year, that works out to about 7%. So they were taking that money, they were building their military and acquiring as many assets worldwide as they could. So the point I'm trying to make is from the Chinese viewpoint, and I don't mean to single out, just from the communist and the socialist viewpoint. And when I say socialist, I do intentionally mean Bernie Sanders, Cortez, what's that guy from Texas? Beto O'Rourke. From those people's standpoint, cheating is okay. Like the Muslims, their religion tells them it's okay to lie to non-believers as long as it advances the cause. So lying is okay, cheating is okay, whatever it takes is okay as long as we get what we want. So they were stealing everything from the United States. Now, let's talk about trade and finance. I think now, okay, so Trump put on the tariffs to get them to come to the negotiating table. And China is suffering big time right now. Okay. They are going to come to the negotiating table because they want those tariffs dropped. My thought on that is this: no matter what happens, no matter what they say, no matter what they do, you continue those tariffs. In fact, if it were me, I would double the tariffs now and I wouldn't make any deal. And then when they come back and they're serious, then I would cut them in half, still keep the tariffs, and they get whatever it is they wanted to do. But you have to keep the tariffs on, otherwise we end up financing the advancement of their country, which will eventually take us over. You can't allow that to happen. We have to think long term when it comes to China because they think long term. They plan long term, they think long term, and they spend long term, and we need to do the same. And right now, we're losing that game. Now, this is going to sound socialist on my part, and I know that before I say it. But here's what I got to say. I believe that we as Americans, and I said this in the 80s when the Japanese were doing this. We need to put a limit on Chinese purchases in this country. We cannot allow them to come in and buy our businesses, our landmarks, um, with money that they got from us from stealing from us. We can't allow that to happen. We need to put limits on the purchases of U.S. properties by foreigners in this country. Now, let me give an example of why I say that. For the last decade, the Chinese have been raping Africa of all of their natural resources. And one of the tricks that they're using is they go in and they tell these governments, let us come in and mine diamonds or gold or whatever it is, and we'll build up your country. We'll build roads, we'll have jobs and your businesses will thrive, and that's all true. The problem is when China comes in, they bring in Chinese to do the work. And when they do the work, they pull out all of the assets and ship it straight back to China. And they do have to live, so the Chinese spend money on the local economy, and they do have to build infrastructure to get those assets out of there. But it's all about stealing from those countries, and by the time those countries realize it, it's too late. The Chinese have been on a rabid fit of absolutely robbing the whole continent of Africa of all of their natural resources. How do we stop it? Well, I'm not sure that we can. I mean, every country is free to make their own decisions and choices, I think. But one of the things that I think is that uh, jawboning, the U.S. president should be jawboning with some of those leaders that we are at least neutral with or friends with in that continent and let them know what's going on. Another thing is the more financial pressure we put on China, the less finances they have to spend and expend on other projects. I mean, up until a couple of years ago, as I said, they were making $200 billion a year off of it, so they could take that money and they could go spend it on, diamond mines in South Africa or gold mines in Uganda, or I mean, so they have plenty of money to spend and spread around, and as a result, they were getting richer, all on our dime. We can knock that out, and I think Trump has done that, and that's why they're squirming so quick. Not only are we hurting their economy, but we are hurting their ability to influence uh, other countries, continents, and the stealing of their natural resources. Another way that we could stop it is to kick them out of the World Trade Organization. Now, when they were indoctrinated in under Bill Clinton, we were told that if they were allowed to trade with the rest of the world as a free country without restrictions, that they would become less communistic and more capitalistic, and they would become a less uh, repressive government. None of that happened. They are still communist. They are still repressing their people. In fact, they are in the middle right now, as we speak, of rounding up and jailing Christians from around their country. They are becoming very, very repressive. They need to be kicked out of the World Trade Organization. And one of the reasons, I mean, other than cheating and lying about international or intellectual properties and the things that we talked about before, other than that is a military reason, and we're going to cover that in just a minute. Another way that we could fight it, well, we could do the same thing to China that we have been doing to Russia for the same reasons. We could put sanctions on the leaders of that country and the leaders of industry in that country. Now, I did a program a couple of years ago called Sanctions Are for Sissies. They didn't work. The sanctions they do now, they work. And the reason they work is because they take it down to the point where these leaders cannot get a hold of their money. They can't do business at any bank. They are taken out of the international market. They are basically sunk. Because of technology, these assets are now able to be sunk. Now, you say, well, why would the bank do that? Well, because let's say that the leader, Xi, has $1 billion sitting in a Swiss bank and he wants to go get it. And with sanctions on Xi, that bank now has a decision to make. We can keep China's business or we can lose the business of the rest of the world because they won't trade with us. That's the power of the sanctions. And right now, just the United States is a much bigger economy than China. They don't want to lose our business. They will stop that. So, sanctions not only on the country doing business with for the rest of the world with China, but on the individuals within China so that they can't get to their money. That would stop that stuff pretty quick. I think that should be on the table. And here's another thought I had about how we could get their attention and stop the cheating and lying. What if we put a blockade on South America? Only on the Chinese. Let the it's nothing against the South Americans. I mean, let them trade with the rest of the world, but not with China or North Korea. And here's why. China has been trying and been successful of building business relationships in South America. In fact, one country in South America, I believe it was Brazil, has dropped the dollar as the currency of trade and has picked up the yuan, which is the Chinese dollar. So now everything they buy from any country in the world, they use the yuan and not the US dollar. And there are about 5 countries that do that that I know of. So what I would suggest is just putting a blockade all the way around South America. No Chinese ship comes in. No South American ship goes out that's going to China. Period. End of conversation. You want to run it? We'll blow you out of the water. This is our continent, and we will protect it. Now, that will stop a lot of trade. That will stop a lot of military. That will get somebody's attention right now, and it will come to confrontation for sure. But China is all the way around the world. I will take those odds any day. We can fight that battle and win that battle easy peasy. But that will be a huge, huge hit. And my guess is all we'd have to do is for a month or two. And they will back down and do whatever it is we tell them to do. So I say, let's put a blockade around South America. All right, let's talk about China's military. Now, the biggest, most aggressive thing that China has done militarily is this. I mean, outside of the fact they've been taking part of that $200 billion a year and building up their military as far as hardware. Other than that, there are some islands in international waters, and this is important, in international waters that China and Japan and the Philippines have all fought over about who controls what. Well, China went out and they started taking boatloads of dirt out and building these islands up so that they would make them bigger. And then on these islands, they would put like a runway. They would put land-to-air missiles. They would put missile systems. They would put radar. But what they're doing is they are militarizing these islands. And there's quite a few of them out there, and they stretch into the South China Sea. Now, not only is that a military outpost that protects them, and again, I don't blame China. I would have done the same thing. The problem is we can't allow that to happen because they are in international waters. Japan has taken them to the World Trade Court and the World Trade Organization, and they have ruled against China every single time, and nothing is done. When any ship goes through there, the Chinese come up and harass them. When planes go through there, Chinese planes go and harass them. Okay? In my opinion, here's what I think. I think we should intentionally go through there, and the first time they come out to harass us, blow them out of the water or blow them out of the air. These are internationally agreed international waters, and I should not have to put up with your crud just because you think you own it. We know that you are doing it. The whole world knows that you have militarized neutral property. That's not going to stand. Not only would I do that, but for every one of those islands they have built up that are in international waters, I would go and drop bombs on them until they all are gone. Now, is that going to elicit a response from China? Probably. Is that going to elicit a military response? Possibly. I don't care. Bring it on. Bring me that fight. I will fight that fight. We made an agreement after World War II to protect that whole area. South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Japan, Guam. We cannot control and protect that area if we allow China to militarize the South China Sea. That is a major trading aisle for ships to go through. If we allow China to do that, we're cutting our own throat. Now, would I negotiate first? I would tell Xi, the president of China, I would tell him, look, you got 90 days, okay? You could pull your stuff out of there and disband, or I can blow it out. Now, I'm giving you 90 days because I'm a nice guy. You know, you're in international waters. You have no leg to stand on. You can come after me militarily, but I'll take that battle all day long. I got power on my side and I got right on my side, and I will take that fight. Now, pull your stuff off of that island or I will blow it out. You got 90 days, go. And then even if they pull their stuff out, I would still blow those islands up so they can't remilitarize them. Because when Trump's gone and we get another wimp like Obama, they'll just go back and do it again. So I blow it to kingdom come. There would be no islands when they were done. Now, I would also use any political steps, and I hate doing that because that gives the power to somebody else other than us. But I would still do it. I would kick them out of the World Trade Organization. And I told you earlier, we talk about a reason why. The World Trade Organization is supposed to be about trade. When one country violates the law, international law and militarizes a neutral land, that should qualify them to be booted the hell out of the World Trade Organization. And that's the reason that I would use to do it. Now, this is the number one. This is the number one idea that I love. I loved it in the 80s. I loved it in the 90s. I loved it in the 2000s. And I love it in the 20 teens. And here's the idea: Star Wars. For you millennials that don't know, this Star Wars was the reason the USSR was finally crushed. And you say, well, what do you mean? Well, up until this particular time, the USSR and the US was in an arms race. You know, we'd buy missiles and they'd buy missiles, and we'd make bombers and they'd make bombers. And finally Reagan came out and said, we're going to do something called Star Wars. And here was the concept. In space, we would have um, a series of things that surrounded the planet that had radar so we could pick things up and lasers that we could shoot things down. So one guy sitting anywhere in the world that had monitors that was watching that. The first country that shot off a missile, we just zeroed in on it like playing a video game, zzz, and we shot it down. Now here's the advantage to that. Let's say that China has a nuclear weapon that they're going to shoot to the United States. We see on video, we see the missile on the launching pad, we see it being shot off. Boom, we eliminate it. Now here's the bonus point. The regular the neutrality is they don't get their missile off. The bonus point is the nuclear fallout that is on that missile hits China. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. So if you have the surrounding of the Earth with Star Wars, all of a sudden we are the arbiters of peace around the planet. Nobody gets any missiles off anywhere. We know every country's move around the planet. Nobody has war with anybody. If anybody tries to cross a border, we just take our lasers and start shooting things. Doesn't require a military. Doesn't require hardware or ships or 3 months to prepare. We just start shooting from Star Wars. And Donald Trump had the right idea. He's calling it Space Force. That's a great idea. And with Space Force, using Star Wars, we can positively keep world peace without even trying hard. That is the long-term goal, in my humble opinion. Now, in the short term, how do we control China in the short term while we're building up Space Force and Star Wars? We build up the military in those countries that we are trying to protect. And when I say build a military, I don't mean their military, I mean our military. We have in Taiwan, we have 2 military bases that I know of. In the Philippines, we have uh, one that I know of. In Guam, we have one that I know of. In Japan, we have 2, I believe. Anyway, we have military bases all around there. We need to double the sizes of those, and we need to update the military hardware that we have with intercontinental ballistic missiles, so that at a moment's notice, China. See, what China is doing right now is they are modernizing their military, which again I don't blame them. I would do the same thing. But in order to counter that, we need to be able to shoot down as many as they are building, which means we need to have more ships. Again, Trump is right. That has ground to air missiles and ground to ground. And from these set bases, we need to have intercontinental ballistics, which we can go around the world. We need to build our military strength in that area using the current military bases. And I will add this, I advocated this with Russia, and I advocate this with China also. Go to every country around China. Now, we have the southern part there, okay, with Taiwan, the Philippines, Japan, Guam, South Korea. We've got the south taken care of. We need to go around the rest of China, and we need to put military bases in every one of those countries and build every one of those up. If you've ever played the game of Risk, it would be like surrounding one country with all the troops you've got. They can't get out without a bloody battle. And we'll take that fight. But that's what needs to happen. Let there be no mistake, no chance for loss. We double down on everything. Double the missiles, double the tanks, double the armory, double uh, the soldiers, double the guns, double everything, and double the number of bases around China. Now, let's talk about just some general things about China. The problem with China, there are many, by the way, but one of them is that these Chinese kids are coming in on visas. They're being educated in America. They're making contacts in America. They're making money in America. And then they go back to their country, take our knowledge. Again, they're stealing it. Remember, the students that come over here and go back, they belong. Remember, their system is different. They owe their allegiance to that country and that government. So anything they learn, they go back and give to them. So they learn about technology and computers, they go back and give it to them. We need to limit the enrollment in U.S. schools of Chinese, period. And I don't know what the numbers are, but let's say we have 5,000 a year that come into this country. We need to limit that to 500. And of that 500, we get to decide what majors they get. I think we should allow them to have majors in agriculture. We should allow them to get majors in literature, but under no circumstances should they be able to come into this country and have majors in medicine, technology, space, aeronautics, military, none of that. Why would you allow your enemies to have education of those majors? Absolutely not. We're not doing that. We need to. We need to lower the amount of immigration that comes in from the, and not just China, but all of our enemies, all of the Arab nations that are Muslim. We need to cut those down to almost nothing. China, North Korea, Russia, Pakistan, all of those immigration numbers need to be cut to almost nothing. Why would you allow access to this country to your enemies? Remember, we're not talking about people. Their system is completely different than ours. Whatever those people learn when they're here, they go back and give directly to their government. They work for their government, and the government benefits from what they learned from us. That's why they're here. We need to stop that. We need to use the international banking system to our advantage for a change. And Trump is doing that by sanctioning the people in Russia. He's basically cut them off. And he's doing the same thing in Iran. We need to do that to China. And not just the country China, but the Chinese leaders and the oligarchs in China. All of the leaders in China that are of technology, they need to be sanctioned. And I think Trump did the right thing. The stock market took a dive when they arrested that lady CFO in Canada from, I can't remember the name of the company, Huawei. Anyway, they make cell phones. Trump had her arrested for stealing technology. Good for him. That's exactly what needs to happen. And he needs to take that and put that on a bigger level, a China level. And here's one that needs to happen. So let's say between now and the time we get Star Wars functional, China manages to get an atomic bomb over the United States. It doesn't hit the United States, but it explodes over the United States. Do you know what'll happen? Our whole electric grid goes away. That's right. Because the waves from the explosion interferes with the defenses we have for our electrical grid, and they go down, and we will be out until they go back in and fix it, and that will take months, if not years. So what we need to do, and it's a very cheap fix to fix it. It's called hardening the defense. We need to harden our defense on our electrical grid. They know that this is a problem, and the government and business has been arguing about this for years. Nobody wants to pay the money. It's a relatively cheap fix. I mean, nationwide, we could fix it for probably $1 billion, but nobody wants to spend the money. The result is our national security is at fault or at risk here. I mean, I want you to think about what if that happened and our electricity goes out for months, if not years? That means we are totally defenseless. We have no electronics. We have no computers. We have no radar. We have no lights. That means we have no grocery stores. With no electricity, we are totally defenseless. If they did that and managed to knock out our electricity, they wouldn't have to fire a shot. They could walk in this country with guns and just shoot us. We wouldn't even know they were here until after it was too late. We need to harden our electrical defenses. Now, here's the thing that Americans are not good at that we need to get set in our mind. We need to prepare for a lifelong, long-term fight with the Chinese. They've already stated their goal. They want to take over the world. They want to be the dominant power in every way, shape, and form. Militarily, economically, manufacturally, technologically, in every way, shape, or form, the Chinese want to dominate. If we don't stay on that on a daily basis, I got to be honest with you, I don't care about playing on a level playing field anymore. I want to dominate. I want to squelch them. I want them out of the picture. If you're in business and you have a competitor coming after you, you don't want to play on a level playing field. You want to beat them. Whatever it takes to beat the competition, that's what you need to do. It's the same thing here. Now, let me tell you what happens if we don't do that. If we don't keep a day in and day out vigilance on beating China, at some point they will overtake us. And then guess what happens? They get to tell us what our role is. They get to dictate terms to us. Think about that. How would you like to have the Chinese telling you that freedom of the press is something they don't tolerate? So from now on, you have no freedom of press, because if you do try to have freedom of the press, we will simply come in and shoot you. You think that's not doable? You better go do your homework on China and press. They don't have freedom of the press in China. They have press that prints whatever the Chinese tell them, much like our press here does for the DNC. That's what their press is. We're not far from that. Long-term, lifelong fight against China in all manner, shape, and form. That's what we need to prepare for. Now, again, this is going to be controversial, and U.S. businesses are not going to like this, but I got to tell you, here's what I'm thinking. We need to encourage U.S. businesses to leave China. I know they went there because there's 1 billion people in that market, and I get it. The lure of making the money and satisfying the stockholders is alluring. I get it. But we need to make it perfectly clear. They are our enemy. In effect, these businesses are aiding and abetting our enemies. Well, first off, in order to do business in China, you have to give them technology. So from that technology, if China is our enemy and you're giving them technology, you're aiding and abetting. And then they get a cut of the profits. You're aiding and abetting the enemy. To me, and by the definition of treason, that's treason. If you are aiding and abetting your enemy, that is treason. I would insist that the U.S. companies pull out of China. And if they didn't, for every outlet they have in China, they get taxed or punished the same amount of whatever profit they make in that country. So if Kentucky Fried Chicken has 30 outlets and they're making $3 billion a year, guess what their U.S. taxes are? $3 billion a year just on China. In effect, they're not making any money. We need to find a way to get the U.S. businesses out of China. Let other countries go in there. Let them give them their technology. We can't aid and abet China. Now, lastly, we need to use sanctions on leaders to force change on the treatment of Christians in China. Up to this point, we have talked about finance, military, culture, those types of things. And as I mentioned earlier, China is currently going through a purge of Christians in that country. At some point, somebody had better stand up and say, stop killing Christians. They do it in the Middle East and nobody says anything. They've died down doing it publicly since Trump's been in office, but when Obama was in office, they did it weekly. They would line up 10 or 15 Christians and cut their heads off with a knife. They'd throw lighter fluid on them and burn them in a cage. They'd throw them off the buildings and watch them bounce. China's going through now and rounding them up and putting them in prison. And for all we know, first off, we have no idea how many there are, how many they've gotten. Secondly, we have no idea what they're doing with them. They could be rounding them up and killing them. There are thousands and tens of thousands of Christians in China. I promise you. I've been watching that for the last decade. There's a lot of Christians in China. And if they round them all up, they will have mass murder. We can't allow that to happen. How could we reward that behavior? We wouldn't have done business with Hitler. We wouldn't have done business with Stalin. We wouldn't have done business with Ayatollah Khomeini. Why would we do business with Xi when he's killing people in mass murder? We cannot allow that to happen. We need to be the leader. We need to act like a leader, and we need to behave like a leader. Now, I want to wrap this up by saying China is a huge, huge enemy of the United States. We came within one administration of becoming a second power in this world. If Trump hadn't come along, we would be a second power. Because so let's say that Hillary had won in 2016. She gets reelected in 2020. She's out by 2024. Their goal was to be world dominant by 2025, and they were well on their way. Now, Trump in 2 years has taken that economy from growing to 7% to not only not growing, but falling backwards. Thank you, Trump. And he's taken that deficit of $200 billion a year to making it less than that. And he's about to double the sanctions again, and he needs to. That will give him more negotiating room further down the road. We need to be thankful to God that Donald Trump is doing the right thing, because China just about made us their, what's the proper term? Biatch. They came within one administration of making the United States their biatch. I know some of these things that I talked about are radical. Some of them are very strong, but these are the things that need to be done. Otherwise, all of this work will be totally wiped out the next time we elect a left-winger into the White House. Think about this. What if Cortez or Bernie Sanders or Beto O'Rourke, what if one of those three actually win the presidency? They'll lift all the sanctions. They'll add more regulation. They will encourage the budget deficit. We will be weaker, and China will be stronger. And now we're right back on the same road. We have to set things that are permanent. We have to be prepared for a long-term fight. And we as Americans need to remind people day in and day out how important this is and keep electing conservative to the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And I don't mean Republican. That isn't what I said. Don't misunderstand what I said. I did not say Republicans. I said conservatives. If you want to throw a conservative Democrat in there, hey, I'm fine with that. Just make sure that they are conservative fiscally, militarily, and socially. I'm fine. You call yourself whatever you want. Just be conservative. Well, that's a program, everyone. We talked about the two things I wanted to talk about: the death of George Herbert Walker Bush, as it goes down in history. Talked about some of the things that happened. And I wanted to just kind of go on a long tirade, giving my thoughts about China and all of the facets that go into our relations with China and how I think the best way to deal with China is. It's not easy, it's complicated. It's not short term, it's long term. It's not taxes, it's not military, it's not social, it's not local, it's international, and it's all of those things all at once. Well, I just want to remind you, if you can see the sign over my shoulder, if you'd like to know a little bit more about who we are and what we do, you can find us online at prayerboxministry.org. That's org.org. Go over there and check us out. There's lots to do over there. Also, we are being on podcast on iTunes. So if you use iTunes, go over there, click on podcast, and then look for us, Right Wing Reverend. Viewership is going up over there, so a lot of people are finding out about us. Go over there and check us out, Right Wing Reverend podcast on iTunes. Well, that's the show, everyone. You have a blessed week. I look forward to next week when we can sit down and talk about this week in politics.